All right, I'm just gonna do a final sound check here. All right, final sound check. Final sound check. All right, final sound check. Final sound check. Perfect. Final sound check. 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 Final sound. All right, and we're live in the city of Los Angeles. I decided to step my microphone game up a bit, and it's paying off. So, for those of you that don't know where we're at, we currently are at the United States Federal District Courthouse for Central District here in Los Angeles. And we're going to do a court report as well as some other city news pertaining to the lawsuit happening against the city of Los Angeles for the fraudulent use and misappropriation, mismanagement, and all sorts of other, frankly, criminal activity uh, by the city and by its mayor as well as its deputies on the mismanagement and the total abomination that is Inside Safe, Alliance, Roadmap, and all these other housing initiatives that purport to eradicate homelessness, but frankly do nothing more than shuffle around paperwork to line the pockets of nonprofits, launder good money that otherwise should be used for people that really need it, rather than paying off cronies and other really criminal gang members, as I like to call them, both at the prosecutor's office, both at the mayor's office, specifically the city attorney's office, and so on. So this is a civil action. It's brought on by a coalition of private firms, people that actually live in the downtown area particularly, and they're called so they raised the federal suit against the city. And interestingly enough, you can find all the transcripts, all the motion filings, and so forth, all for free online on the Central District Court website. And I want to read you some of the happenings for this week, some of the happenings for today here at the courthouse. It'll be a blend of city news, both from City Council as well as a court update here for this actual case. Starting off for a trial, one of the witnesses that testified yesterday, I can't remember their name, but it was a tall, skinny, blonde woman, and she had some interesting things to say. We got to see for the first time in public the exhibits that actually explain the breakdown of percentages for how many people going into these various programs actually remain permanently housed, how many go back into homelessness, how many get any sort of success really from the money that's allegedly being used for those very same purposes. And just getting straight down into it, the line of questioning, I think, before I get to the actual percentages, really sets things up for a spectacular explanation for what's really going on in Skid Row and elsewhere, what's really going on with homelessness in LA County, what's really going on in the city of Los Angeles, and frankly, what's really going on throughout the state of California as well as the rest of the United States and the world, really, when it comes to these programs that are touting to solve homelessness, that are touting to solve poverty, that are touting to shelter people. And the grand story is major corruption and collusion by the government to line the pockets of developers, to line the pockets of other private interest groups, special interest groups, and businesses under the guise that there is this feel-good initiative that you're somehow actually helping people, but in reality, you're really doing nothing more than laundering money. You're really doing nothing more than putting up a front and AstroTurf Group, for all intents and purposes, that is totally mismanaging and totally misusing money that was actually appropriated for a very legitimate cause and went instead to lining the pockets of special interest groups, direct individuals, and some of the businesses that they have affiliations with. In this case, it's, of course, the mayor's office, it's the city attorney covering up some of that crime and collusion, as well as the various deputies that have a hand in all this. And I want to start off by some of the line of questioning that was first set to introduce the exhibits on showing the breakdown of percentages on how many people actually came back to homelessness. And for the plaintiff side, the alliance of firms that are suing the city, uh, here is what that line of questioning was to the deputy that was responsible specifically for procuring these services from various nonprofits and so on to allegedly execute whatever social services and putting people in beds that the mayor and the city are claiming, when in reality there was none. So here we go. The first line of questioning asked whether they do any due diligence and take any input on how the people coming into their programs from the get-go actually became homeless in the first place. Okay, that was the question by the plaintiff. The deputy sitting being questioned said no, meaning the roadmap program, the alliance program, and the Inside Safe program, they do not do any sort of due diligence or questions to specifically find out how it is that these individuals came to be homeless in the first place. They do no such questioning as to whether it was a systemic issue, it was a personal issue, or a combination of the two. They admitted that on the record. That is officially on the record, and you can check for yourself on the transcript. They were asked whether the office understands and is aware that there are in fact scientific factors at the systemic level that lead to individuals becoming homelessness. They answered yes, meaning the office of the mayor, and it's also assumed the rest of the deputies understand that homelessness is a systemic issue just as much as a personal issue. So there's not just a singular factor that got somebody to be homeless in the first place. And that's important because what it shows is that they are aware that there is a combination of both systemic and personal issues at play into somebody becoming homeless. But specifically, their program does nothing to address how that person even became homeless in the first place by simply asking the question. They do not ask any sort of intake question on how that person became homeless in the first place. And why that's relevant is because the next following question. The following question, logically, right, was how can then your stated mission of helping people out of homelessness, how can that be achieved if you're not doing any sort of due diligence to understand how they became homeless in the first place, and that you are aware and understand that there's a play of both systemic and personal issues at play into making them homeless to begin with. One of the reasons, so let me back up a step and just explain what the difference between systemic and personal issues are, okay? And a perfect example of somebody becoming homeless at the personal level is they develop some sort of addiction, and usually a substance of addiction is the most common one and the easiest one to explain. Whether somebody takes an addiction to alcohol, whether they take an addiction to some other substance, that can have dramatic negative impacts to their success in life. So one of the things being when it comes to getting a job, you might have a job, but you perpetually show up late. Whether it be you have spousal issues on the interpersonal, domestic level, where your substance abuse issue might get you into constant fights with your significant other and or your kids. That's an example of a personal issue. Example of a systemic issue is racial discrimination by, say, a bank or another government agency that gives out grants and the like, where you're applying for some sort of business loan and you get denied based on your skin color, your creed, and other potential affiliations that might be associated with your culture and so forth. And those exist. They're very real. And as anybody that knows anything about LA, it very well is alive and sadly well here in LA. Definitely much more so than other major cities, which is bizarre for people that aren't, accustomed to LA. A lot of people think big cities, less racial tensions, at least I do in my opinion. Coming from the East Coast, it's interesting to see how areas like New York City compare to Los Angeles, where racial identities are far more tolerated and accepted, and there's definitely a much clearer sign of coming togetherness, whereas it's very much more tense in Los Angeles. So that line of questioning, right, put the proper foundation in place for people to understand that the mayor and everybody else, including the city attorney, know that the services they're providing are a total sham, because they're providing services, yet they're doing no due diligence to understand how these people even became homeless in the first place. And if you don't do any of that work to understand how they became homeless in the first place, how could you possibly ever put together any sort of programs or services to help ease them out of it, both on the personal level and on the systemic level? And that's a big issue. It's a big problem, and that's ultimately what that question, what that line of questioning laid the foundation for. And it was a great series of questions. What resulted from that was the following questions. So we got to see finally an explanation as part of official obtained records as to how many people, percentage-wise, going through these programs reverted to being homeless again. So there's three programs. The first is the Roadmap program. The second is the Alliance program, and the third is the, of course, Inside Safe program. All of those are programs by the city that are supposed to address homelessness and providing shelter to unhoused people. So it's frankly disgusting when I read these off to you, but here's the breakdown. All right. For the Roadmap program, and I'll explain the context for each of these and what each of them mean, because there's some important caveat and nuance here. So for the Roadmap program, 72.5% of participants all went straight back to being homeless. 72.5% from the Roadmap program. For the Alliance program, 66.4% went straight back into being homeless. For the Inside Safe program, 53.9% exited straight back to homelessness. The interesting thing to note here, and I'll repeat the numbers again. So 72.5% from the Roadmap program all become homeless after exiting the program. 66.4% all become homeless after exiting the Alliance program. 53.9% all become homeless once they exit the Inside Safe program. Here's what you need to know about these percentages. The rest of that remaining percent does not, and I want to clarify this, it does not mean you are housed. No, that is not what that means. In fact, quite the opposite. The actual percentages for people remaining sheltered is barely above 10% for each of the programs. Barely. So that means the remaining percentage of people are literally just lost in the system. They're completely discarded. Nobody really has a clue where they are. Nobody's really tracking or measuring where they're going. They're just gone. That also means the money that was supposed to be used yet again for the alleged purposes of housing these people is also gone. It's gone. It's just like that South Park episode. It's gone. It's all gone. And so that's what those percentages actually mean. And the most fascinating part about this is not the percentages, but it's the testimony of all the deputies that come out here and say with such extreme level of confidence, right, with such extreme level of gusto, that we have full faith in the competency of the programs. We know the programs work. They're all legit. They're super rah-rah, the biggest cheerleaders. Yet from their own records, okay, their own records, they're an abysmal failure. It would be one thing to have a couple of percentages of failure. That's expected. That's going to happen on a personal and systemic level. However, when you have such egregious numbers like this, with 72.5% from the roadmap program, 66.4% from the Alliance program, and 53.9% from the Inside Safe program, going straight back to being homeless, no shelter, nothing, that is an utter failure at the systemic level of those programs and of all of the individuals and their affiliated corporations involved. And it begs the question, where is the money going? That's the real story of the whole homelessness industrial complex here in Los Angeles, both the city, the county, and the smaller neighborhoods like Skid Row. That is the real story. It's a huge, huge, huge criminal racket of fraud, of taking public money and funneling it, laundering it and funneling into the direct pockets of government officials. That's the real story. That's what this case is uncovering, and it's setting up the precedent for criminal prosecution thereafter. The Alliance on Human Rights, which is just a coalition of private firms coming together, predominantly being people that actually live in the downtown area and are in, at the very least to say, disgusted with what's happening with their tax dollars. They are just a regular civil plaintiff. They are not a government agency. This hopefully is setting up the path for criminal prosecution by a government agency, ideally the DOJ. And there was an announcement recently that the DOJ did in fact create a task force to investigate the fraudulent use and just total corruption of the Inside Safe program, as well as various other Los Angeles City housing related programs. Something more interesting. As a result of all this, the most important piece that will help prosecute at the criminal level, right? Because at the civil level, we're having the Human Rights Alliance tackle some of these issues on money. But at the criminal level, what's really important here will be the actual voices of the people that have gone through the programs, that have actually gone through and been in a shelter, that have received any sort of programs and services, alleged services, what their actual experience is like, what some of the encounters they might have had with the staffers on the inside at these programs, how they were treated. That's the real story. And that's actually what I've been working towards getting. The stories of those people to come out here and not only attend the hearings, but also attend some of the, actually, should point that way, actually attend the city council committees as well, and city council proper. Earlier this week, a day ago, yesterday, there were two young women who actually had endured such abuse. And their stories are unfortunately not at all unique. They're not at all uncommon. And the common thread tying them all is that the staff and the services and the programs that were set up that were supposed to treat them well through these three programs I mentioned and many other alleged homelessness and shelter programs has been absolutely horrific. It's absolutely abusive, and the two women that came before the Housing and Homelessness Committee just yesterday testified to that. They explained how they were being abused by the staff that were managing the shelter. They were explaining how they were unlawfully locked behind a door, repeatedly got into all sorts of verbal altercations, completely not instigated by them, by the staffers. You'll hopefully hear soon enough after the courtroom proceedings are over with that many others also face the same level of abuse. And it's a similar story, right? When we talk about all this other corruption and lack of accountability, which are the real stories here, the common theme is the government allowing criminal behavior and, in fact, also engaging in criminal behavior. Um, and so that's why you get these grassroots. That's why you get these sort of pop-up criminal rackets like Scientology. Scientology is frankly not at all unique. They are one of the many criminal entities that are responsible for much of this corruption. In this case, you know, we know through years and years of records beforehand, and especially today, one of the rackets that criminal gangs like Scientology are involved with, particularly in LA, is the whole real estate slash housing racket. Okay, claiming assets and claiming wealth that sits in the form of real estate and hiding behind all sorts of tax loopholes, while at the same time enjoying public services at no cost to them anyway. Cost to us, the taxpayer, us the public, but not to them. And that's the real story, right? That's the real actual problem at play. That's the big issue here. And that's what is not covered at all in anything related to Skid Row. All of the propaganda that people think of when they think of Skid Row has to do with some very, it's the usual like boo-hoo sad story, you know, all these homeless people, and you know, life is so hard, and let's, you know, send them just thoughts and prayers. But nobody's really done any investigative work to actually take their stories and see how they were failed by these programs, how the system utterly failed them. And that's because many of these folks, from the staffers at these roach motels, are all in on the scheme. There's lots of cronies that Bass, Heidi Feldstein Soto, all these folks have to pull this off. Because this doesn't just happen, right? This is a multi-layered approach. This is a multifaceted problem, meaning that there's multiple different gangs of criminals involved in making this happen. But at the head of it all are government officials allowing it to happen and not prosecuting the violators, because they too are a violator. They too are a participant in this criminal racket. And that's the story. It's been a long piece that I've been working towards. I don't even know how many stories and records I have, but that's the big reveal. That's the primary reason I actually came out here and got involved with seeing just what LA is about. You know, Scientology is just simply a conduit. It's just, you know, dipping your toe in the proverbial criminal water that there is here in LA. And there's such an easy corporation to expose with their criminal behavior that it just sets a great foundation to segue into all this other information. And so I wanted to go over a couple of other updates at the city level, and I'm just going to pull up my notes here. Let's see. Okay, so today at the trial, there's a couple of other more fascinating things also taking place. So one of the people on the witness stand today is actually the deputy mayor, who is specifically holds the title of the lead of the deputy mayor of the homelessness and housing initiatives. She worked as an infirmary nurse, which is quite interesting that somehow she jumped from being a nurse to now being the business consultant that receives all sorts of fraudulent money. Interesting career path, but here's some of the highlights. Each year so the start of Inside Safe Okay, the escalation of money and budget that's been allocated each year over year has had an increasing trend. Um, each year, one particular year, there was about $180 million used. Uh, Last year, well over $250 million used. Uh, and each year, there's quite a significant increase. There's no set formula for how much, but it's quite significant. It's not 1 or 2 million. We're talking about over 50 million each and every year that gets added to this overall budget. Um, the first guy testifying today, again, I forget his name, but he had the sides of his hair shaved clean. He had just the faux hawk on, but he was also part of the mayor's office, and you can see it on the transcripts. Uh, he admitted that part of their programs, particularly for Inside Safe, is they use motels pretty much exclusively for providing shelter. It was also admitted that the mayor of LA is the one that has the power to allow the controller's office full audit of all of the homelessness and housing programs, Alliance Roadmap, and Inside Safe. Meaning Mayor Bass has the full power at any point in time to simply allow Mejia access to all the books. The city all this witness also admitted that the city did not update its bedding plan that was in existence prior to Bass. Bass understood that there was, in fact, a plan for how many beds and the process to creating those beds for sheltered homelessness. They had an opportunity to draft a proposal and set a new one as part of this as part of her tenure as mayor. They chose not to. That when they were asked why, the the, the witness stated that there was some magical private meeting with the county and the special master that allegedly, and the city attorney's office that allegedly told them to not go through and submit their proposal as official. Another question here that really stuck out with this witness, and he's a male, white male. He was asked directly, what was the goal of Inside Safe beds? Was it to help alleviate homelessness? And provide the answer no. Then they were asked, did the number of beds under Inside Safe increase while you were there and throughout its existence? They answered yes. So then, why the increase in beds if the goal was not to help alleviate homelessness and house people? Was it just pure coincidence? They answered yes. And I just want to stop for a second and explain how utterly insane that sounds, right? The concept of beds is one thing that has still not been defined all too well, but beds can mean a number of things. It can mean like the bunk beds that we see a lot Scientology, where they're literally stacking 6 people to a room. But that's one room, 6 beds though, technically. Around 12,930 or 10 beds exist as part of Inside Safe. If the goal of adding more beds was not to help people have shelter, then it obviously leaves room for, well, what the hell is the goal? And a reasonable person, as they would say, could reasonably infer the goal of increasing beds is to pretend that your services are working, effective, and to try and justify a higher budget to the program to make it seem legit while not being legit. That's a reasonable inference you could gather just from that line of questioning alone. Moving on from another highlight. A notable thing you should know is one of the guys that is on the side of the city. So the city has at least 10 lawyers on this private counsel in addition to deputies from the city. Heidi Feltzing-Soder herself was there today personally. Hey Heidi Boo. Hello. Um, the guy on the city side was found to make repeat objections to literally every line of questioning. I mean, this guy was utterly relentless. His name is Marcellus McCrae. He's from the Gibson Dunn law firm, a very well-known law firm here that is helped the city through all sorts of cases where the city has been the go-to for allegations on criminal and acts and misuse of funds. And this guy literally, I mean, if you farted the wrong way, he would object to the fart to form, relevance, and lacking foundation. I mean, that's the type of guy that this guy is. That's also the type of lawyers that this firm particularly is known for. So, you know, if you're in that courtroom, just careful how you let your fart out, otherwise he will object to it. Another highlight was a question was asked to clarify the meaning and difference of cleaning, so street cleanings and encampment reduction. Are they the same? Are they different? If so, what is the difference? The only clarification we got, which I think is a very important one, is that cleaning and encampment reduction are not the same. They don't count them the same. And they're set as distinct activities. And the question again was repeated of this witness: who sets policy for homelessness programs? Again, they answered the mayor as well as city council. Who makes the decision on which beds to fund? They answered the mayor and city council, they being this witness who is a deputy from the mayor's office for the city. Who sets inside safe policy decisions? It was answered that the mayor does. Are there multiple advisors to the mayor for inside safe decisions? Yes. However, all of those advisors are at the mayor's office. That's important. A question was asked about whether the deputies knew about some of the public comments that the mayor had made regarding the data systems that purported to gather information on homelessness in LA, and whether they know about the mayor's stance on this. And the public comment that the mayor has made is specifically on her acknowledgement of the complete and utter lack of data collection systems to better understand how homelessness is happening in LA and the different people actually providing services to allegedly help with alleviate homelessness. There was an objection. The objection specifically was that the city said, well, this whole case is actually not about homelessness. It has nothing to do with policy at all. This is just a case on contracts and contracts alone. There was a settlement agreement for the services provided by these three programs, and that's all it has to do with, which was interesting to hear because the line of questioning I just mentioned earlier literally addressed the fact that policy is what sets, right? Policy is what sets forward these decisions. And so that also means policy is literally the precursor and the prerequisite to these contracts being created and enforced, and measuring whether those stated goals are being achieved or not, and to what degree. They cited the Apex Doctrine as an objection, which was sustained by the judge. And I just want to explain to people what the Apex Doctrine is. I'm just going to pull up the notes I had. So The guy being questioned on the witness stand was, again, just the deputy. And basically, the Apex doctrine is that it's designed to protect the high-level executives of any corporation, city or otherwise, from being deposed unless certain conditions are met. And so basically, it's to stop harassing or burdensome depositions. Uh, Generally, what it means is that actually other sources of records and information are far more reliable than the top-level executives. Those specifically being of the deputies themselves that are carrying out these tasks. And so lower level employees, be they clerks, analysts, this doctrine says they're actually more knowledgeable and competent about some of these operations and some of the data, information, and records than the high level executive. So that's what the Apex doctrine is. That objection to the question of policy having anything or nothing to do with setting forward the terms of the contracts and it being not at all about policy, that was sustained on that ground. And this is probably one of the funniest ones. So the male witness, still the same guy, was also asked if the city, in his official capacity as a deputy of the mayor and working for the city, if the city is facing a budget crisis. He answered, no, it's not, and that the solutions being proposed by the mayor are all good. They are handling it, and the proposed budget by the mayor will reconcile all these budget-related problems. And so as such, he answered, no, there's no crisis. And we know why that is, right? He answered this way because he wants to keep his job. And that's point blank what it is. We have another witness right after this guy. She's the CEO of a nonprofit called Dignity Moves, and her testimony was quite interesting. She specifically, her nonprofit specifically handles unsheltered homelessness. She's not in LA. She's actually worked more in Northern California, but she was called basically to testify to some other success stories outside of LA on some of the budget issues and some of the use of money to making, sheltered homelessness a reality and what potential costs, at least analogous, could be for the LA area. And she was asked about the day rate per bed, meaning how much money does it cost per person to actually keep them sheltered. And in her definition of day rate, she specifically used the definition where a bed was a private abode. It was not bunk beds all open in a public in some sort of open foyer. And I thought that was interesting because that's not, in fact, there is no standard definition of what a bed is with regards to Inside Safe, with regards to Alliance and whatnot. You can have here very well, right? You can have 2,000 beds. That would count under their 12,900 bed obligation or so. But is that really, are you really helping homelessness in that regard? Are you actually providing the services that you're claiming to? I would argue not, and it's clear that the plaintiff is also getting to that point. And the final witness that I stepped out to just before was the deputy mayor, of course. And this one was by far the most interesting testimony of all day. So she was quite hostile as a witness, regardless of the question asked, even just simply stating what her responsibilities were, even after she stated it, just to have her reiterate it, she was incredibly hostile. She would clearly object to even being asked a question, regardless of what the question was, and just go off on this complete tangent about how there's people suffering and she was a nurse and suffering sucks. was basically the whole rigmarole she tried to play on. She tried to play on this whole, I was a nurse, and you should just take that instead of asking answering the damn question. And so, what was one of those questions? Well, here we go. She was asked if she had ever come across the Alliance document that talked about the breakdown of how many people became homeless after exiting each program, if she was aware of it. And the reason why that's important is because when she introduced herself, she specifically explained that she's the person responsible for anything and everything regarding. I'm just going to put this away. She's responsible for everything and everything to do with homelessness. And so that means both the advisory input into Inside Safe as well as Alliance and Roadmap. Yet she first said she had never seen this document before, yet backpedaled and said, in fact, actually she knew of it, and she knew about the breakdown of how many people exited to being homeless afterwards. She lied and said there is an intake done to understand what caused these people to be homeless in the first place, when clearly that's not the case. It was, at least the very least, conflicting information for what the witness yesterday said, which is we don't do any sort of intake at all. None of the vendors do any sort of intake at all to understand, not at the city level, not at the other corporations providing the services. Nobody does any intake due diligence to understand how the hell these people became homeless in the first place. She's still testifying right now. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys. It's just gonna see here. All right. And we're going to have some people come out live, but I just wanted to do that recap first. Some other information that it's good to know for people. So the Michelle McGinnis case, there we go. So the Michelle McGinnis case, for those of you who don't know, she worked at the city attorney's office for over 30 years as a deputy prosecutor. Around last year, in 2023, she was promoted as the head of the criminal branch, and she was basically fired for being a whistleblower. One of the most interesting things about the Michelle McGinnis case, two things. First of all, she's having a hearing on July the 3rd of this year on a motion that the city made to strike her lawsuit off altogether. And the second is, back in her hearing in February this year, I believe it was February 4th, she won the right to depose the city attorney herself, Heidi Feltzing Soto. So that's going to be a very interesting case to follow as well. I'll have some more updates on it. I read through it. It's how I found out about the Arthur Anderson accounting firm being tied to Heidi Feltzing Soto, the lawyer and the city attorney of Los Angeles, and how she was a counsel for that company at one point. And that company is also the same company that Enron used to commit their wide-scale fraud. If you don't know what the whole Enron fraud is, I highly suggest you look it up, which is huge. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that deposition of the city attorney herself, and see how my other stream is doing. And if not, I'll cut it off here, and we'll wait for people to come in. All right, so that's that for this stream. I'll go live again and in just a bit. So for now, thanks guys. See you in a bit. Bye-bye.